And the thing I've always said is that data literacy doesn't mean you know how to calculate a bunch of equations. Data literacy means you have a bullshit detector in your head that allows you to ask the right 2 or 3 questions about whether or not this thing makes a lick of sense.
Welcome to What Gets Measured, a NinjaCat podcast about marketing, performance management, metrics, and effectiveness. Because what gets measured gets managed. I'm your host, Jake Sanders. If you're on LinkedIn and following the marketing dialogue, then there's a pretty good chance you've seen the name Dale Harrison pop up in the comments. Dale is always dropping evidence-backed truth bombs on posts about marketing that miss the mark. Dale has strong thoughts on the buzzwords that are brandished online, and it's just because he knows with the right approach, our industry could be doing better, sooner, and faster. He's a commercial strategy and marketing effectiveness consultant with decades of experience in many different executive roles spanning various industries, and he's here today to talk about data literacy for marketers. Dale, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
So before we were recording, you were talking about your background. Before you came into marketing, you had a different kind of focus. Can you talk just basically about like that beginning of your career and how you pivoted it into marketing?
Oh, well, that's a long story because I've had a tendency to do different things over the years. So back in the olden days, I started out as an experimental physicist doing superconductivity research. So, uh, yeah, and one of the things that brings with it is a lot of math proficiency and a lot of experience working with lots and lots of really messy data.
Mhm.
And that becomes very useful in marketing. Um, along the way, I picked up an additional graduate degree in econometrics,
Mhm.
additional graduate work in statistics. So again, a lot of depth there. For a long period, I was primarily doing technology development work. Things that lived at the intersection of physics, engineering, and software. So stuff like automation, robotics, sensor networks, embedded systems development for instrumentation, things like that. And then I got sucked into biotech mid-career. I ended up retraining in molecular biology and virology. And then through part of that, I ended up going into finance for a while, doing valuation analysis for M&As and doing restructuring and recapitalization for turnarounds, including running the turnarounds. But along the way, ended up falling into marketing, where I've been for quite some time now.
Wow.
But the advantage there is I bring with me kind of a unique set of experiences because I got the math, I've got you know economics and econometrics. I've got a lot of software background. I've developed proficiency in about 40 different programming languages over my career. Still have proficiency in about 5. And I don't code anymore per se, but if I need to code to solve a problem, I can do it. and and then I've got the math background, and that helps. And so that gives me a much more, I think, sort of structured analytical way of thinking about marketing. But at the same time, I also recognize that marketing is very heavily driven by creative because we're
Mm.
dealing with humans. We're trying
Mhm.
to we're trying to change the minds of humans.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I've always said is that for me anyway, the definition of marketing is about bringing into existence a different future state of the world than would have existed if you had not done the marketing. And that different future state of the world is embodied in the form of memory traces and recall triggers in the minds of future buyers. And everything we do in marketing has to be about implanting those memory traces, refreshing those memory traces, implanting the right sort of recall triggers that will trigger at the right moment when the right buying situation arises. And and I think that it's all about basically hacking brains. Um, and it's not about the techniques and the tactics. And I think that a lot of marketing gets really down the rabbit hole of tactics, without ever stopping to ask, does any of this stuff make any sense? Is any of this accomplishing what it is we have to accomplish? Or
Right.
even to ask the question, what is it that we have to accomplish? Because what is it that you have to accomplish is not a high click-through rate on your Google search campaign.
Right.
It is to, you know, in that case, it is to trigger recall of hopefully a previously implanted memory from your brand marketing, because they're now looking for something and they see you and they'll instantly recognize you because because you're not trying to form a new memory in their head. You're simply triggering the memory that's already there because you did a good job a year ago with your brand marketing.
I know.
And
Well, that's time scale is the big thing there too. I mean,
yeah,
what is missing is, in your mathematical appreciation for numbers and how things exist on a timeline, you got to have an appreciation for the timeline. And I think that's maybe the biggest thing from that. But you are so focused on data, and it's amazing to know that you have like experimental physicists, like a bio, like coding, all of the like you're not just sitting on LinkedIn making stuff up like the rest of us. You have an amazing thing called the Marketing Measurement Newsletter. And every time I saw it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. It's a framework that categorizes marketing metrics across 10 fundamental dimensions like correlation, causation, leading, lagging indicators, among others. And, in the spirit of data literacy, could you walk us through these distinctions? I mean, and you just kind of explained how misinterpreting these categories could lead to poor marketing decisions, but can you sort of expand on that a little bit?
so I think that there are a number of in some ways, this really goes to the broader issue of just basic data literacy.
Hmm.
Um, because this isn't really about calculating a bunch of numbers or doing a lot of math.
Mm.
It's simply thinking about claims that come attached with numbers. And how do you think about things? And I think in marketing, there's because marketers are not given good formal training in mathematics as when they go through undergraduate. I think there's a lot of both fear and excessive respect, um, about about marketing. I'm sorry, about numbers.
Uh-huh.
And so there's this tendency to sort of believe numbers automatically and not be critical and not ask questions.
Mm.
And on the marketing measurement newsletter, the this issue is from back in March, end of March.
Hmm.
But one of the things I talked about was how a lot of the metrics that we deal with in marketing can really be categorized into a relatively small number of sort of competing categories.
Hmm.
And so, for instance, one of the big ones is correlation versus causation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So correlation is, we spent money on this, search campaign, paid search campaign, and we got a lot of clicks. So, and maybe even if you're really good, you can say, and the people that clicked, a bunch of them bought. And so
Hmm.
now we've got some ability to correlate money that was spent with revenue that came in.
Hmm.
Um, but at the end of the day, that's essentially an efficiency metric.
Mm.
How many dollars did you have to spend in order to get these, in order for this level of action to occur? So how efficient were you in spending those dollars?
Mm.
Um, the real question is, did you get someone to buy that would not have otherwise bought?
Mm.
And so this is the idea of causation versus correlation. And the classic example that I have seen for many, many years, because I've done and continue to do a lot of work in paid search, is branded paid search.
Oh, yeah,
That
that's a big one.
I have never seen a single example of branded paid search that even remotely came close to paying for its cost. Even though a lot of the attribution software including Google, will tell you, that it is your highest ROI campaign, your branded paid search. And it is the highest ROI in the sense that the revenue that you correlate with the campaign is a lot bigger number than the cost of paying for the campaign. But the question was, were any of these people not going to buy anyway?
Right.
And and the analogy I give is that, and this is a very, very close analogy. If you're the manager of a Whole Food store and you decide to spend some marketing budget by hiring a guy to hold a sign saying shop at Whole Foods, and have that person walk back and forth in front of the front door to the store. And then you count everyone that walked past this person, and what they bought, and then
Right.
you come up with the ROI of that campaign. That ROI is gonna look really good. Um,
Yeah.
but even though it is clearly entirely a waste of money, um, and there's actually a very close corollary to this as well, which is competitor branded search. Because this is the other thing I see is, well,
I'll buy
we're gonna
yours, you buy mine. Yeah, I've seen it.
yeah. And I have never once seen a single competitor branded search campaign that made any sense. And there the problem is somewhat the opposite, because you're trying to take someone who has extremely high intent and divert them away at the last moment. And so the analogy I use there is that, imagine you're the manager of the Kroger store down the street
From the
from the
Whole
Whole
Foods.
Foods. And
Right.
and you do a marketing campaign that involves hiring someone to hold a sign saying "Shop at Kroger's" and walk back and forth in front of the entrance to Whole Foods. The question is, how many people do you think are gonna see that sign, turn around, get back in their car, and drive down the street to the Kroger store? The answer is none. This is why competitor branded search doesn't work. And this goes to the heart of correlation versus causation. Just because you can measure something, where, I did something over here that went up and then this thing over here went up, doesn't mean that there's any connection. Yeah. And so this is one of a list of these differences. I'll tell you another one that I think I has been a shocker for me,
Mm.
is there doesn't appear to be more than maybe 1 in 10,000 marketers that seem to be capable of grasping the difference between a forecast and a performance metric, between things that haven't yet happened but might happen in the future versus numbers that describe actual things that have happened in the real world in the past. And you would think that the ability to tell the difference between the past and the future would not be difficult, but it turns out to be. And so there are a handful of metrics that are pure forecast metrics
Mm.
that marketers insist on using as performance metrics
Mm.
to try to either justify or explain or improve existing processes. And so, and the biggest offender on this is sales velocity. Sales velocity is not a performance metric. It is a guess about things in the future that may or may not ever happen.
Mhm.
You cannot use guesses in the future to describe the past. And the analogy I give is, I cannot, I cannot try to explain why I'm overweight today based on what I might decide to have for dinner next month. That makes no sense.
It's so tortured.
But
I
but but that's exactly, if you're trying to either measure or improve existing performance or existing processes by looking at sales velocity, that's exactly what you're doing. You're making a guess about the future and trying to use it to explain things that happened in the past.
can I, how does that happen?
No, I'm just saying that the equation itself, that sales velocity equation that people constantly talk about, is a forecast. And this goes back to the idea of, what is a forecast? A forecast is a guess about the future. It is a guess about things that haven't happened. But to make a forecast, unless you're reading goat entrails or something, the way that you make a forecast is you take numbers from the past that help you define some sort of rate of change, and you apply that to some current variable. Um, and so the classic example is, we're going to grow revenue by 50% this year. So the rate based predictor is 50%. And you're applying that to last year's revenue, which is a
Mm.
real number.
Mm.
Just because you say you're going to grow 50% doesn't mean you're growing 50%. We'll know in a year, but we don't know now, because right now it's a guess about something that may or may not happen in the future. Even though one of the two numbers in that equation is a real number, your revenue.
I'm wondering if marketers and their inability to kind of parse through these things is a creation of their station, not necessarily a reflection of how they think, but I think that they're like, I'm here in this job. And, I feel like I'm going to just find numbers, that could kind of like work with us. Because I mean, like just kind of speak on the fact, like, is our inability of marketing, is that something that was structurally given to us? Or like, what is,
No, it's
what,
always a choice. It's
it's
always
always a choice. It's a
it's
personal
always a choice.
choice.
And it's a choice to be skeptical and to ask questions
Right.
and to want to know what this thing really means. And let
Right.
me throw a couple of other forecasts that no one seems to ever grasp to be forecast.
Mm,
You hear these people use a really idiotic term, and that term is pipeline ROI.
mm,
And what they're doing is they're taking, they're saying that this much marketing, we did $1,000 worth of marketing and we produced $5,000 worth of pipeline. If it's pipeline, there's not a dollar associated with that because
mm,
no one's bought anything yet. You
right.
can't pay the electricity, with any of those dollars in your $5,000 of pipeline. It's a forecast. And
Right.
and so and and there's no such thing as an ROI against a forecast because it hasn't happened yet. You're making a guess about the future. And you're making a double guess in here because you're making a guess about, what each one of these deals will actually close at in terms of a dollar value,
Right.
and you're making a guess as to whether or not it's going to close.
Right.
And these are guesses about the future for which you will not know the answer until some point further off into the future. So, pipeline ROI is I mean, if someone says those words, that should be all you need to know to not listen to anything they say.
There's a flag.
Uh, but here's another one:
Yeah.
CAC to LTV ratio.
Ooh.
Now, CAC is, in theory, cost of customer acquisition cost. In theory, that's a real number that you could at least potentially know. Now, I think that there's some real arguments about whether or not you can really know that number very well, but at least you're attempting to measure things that have actually happened in the past.
Right.
So let's say you can perfectly figure out the CAC. But if you're doing a CAC to LTV ratio, what's LTV? Lifetime value.
You won't know until they died.
You won't know until they die. Right. And so and so you're making a guess about the future. And
People are making these guesses because it looks good. That's it.
right.
Right?
But the point is that I think it becomes extremely critical to understand the distinction between a guess, however good that guess might be, a guess about stuff in the future that may or may not ever happen versus a number describing things that have actually happened in the real world, which means in the past. And every time you take a number from the past and you bolt it on to a guess about the future, the end result of that is a forecast, which is another guess about the future. And LTV is a guess about the future, and you won't know until that customer churns at some point what their real lifetime value was. Um, when you but if you take that forecast and you ratio it to a number about some things that happened in the past, CAC, what you end up with isn't a real number. You end up with another forecast.
A triple
Yeah.
a
So,
triple forecast, a forecast on a
well,
forecast.
so right, and the analogy I use is, let's say you're making sausages, and you've got 20 pork chops that you're going to grind into sausage.
Mm.
One of these pork chops has gone bad, but you go ahead and you throw it in the grinder anyway. So the question then is, are those pork chops only 5% bad? Or are they completely bad? And the
Okay,
answer is
my
they're they're completely bad.
That's
They're
what I was
not
just about to say.
5%
Like,
bad.
let me jump in there real fast. No, what you're saying is amazing though, because I'm talking to like one of the smartest mathematically literate, and also kind of aware, conscious, if I should say, marketers that I've and what I love is that you're not throwing numbers in my face. You're talking about analogies. Like, think about this. It's like sausage, or you're over here. And what I love about that is getting us thinking metaphors like what you're doing is you're saying, like, it's about hacking brains. You're hacking our brain. You're hacking my brain right now, man. And I don't think I like it. No, I actually love it because you're giving metaphorical structures, things that exist that I can feel and understand, and then applying it to really high flying concepts. And I think that is like, that's the heart of it all. And part of me was thinking, all of this pipeline ROI and the LTV and the CAC and all these, missing ratios and predictions and forecasts, it comes down to one of the distinctions, which is efficiency and effectiveness. And
Right,
I just want you to like maybe kind of talk to us really quickly and unpack that because I think a lot of people are doing the busyness, but they're not getting to
right.
the business.
So
Um, so
so the a good rough rule of thumb is you look at all of your marketing metrics and you can divide them into two groups. Marketing metrics that start with the letter C or the letter R, and then everything else. And if it starts with the letter C or the letter R, it is almost always going to be an efficiency metric,
mm,
but it will tell you nothing about whether or not you're being effective. So things like cost per lead, CPM, click through rate, conversion rate, ROI, ROAS. These these are all efficiency metrics. They tell you nothing whatsoever about whether or not you're being effective.
Quote bomb.
And the problem is, we need high efficiency because we don't want to spend more money than we need to. But we also don't want to throw poor money down a rat hole because we're doing something that's not producing any results. Like, 99.999% of all paid branded search campaigns, as an example.
right.
And, because you can have really high efficiency numbers
Mm.
and very poor effectiveness numbers. And the problem is that simply looking at something as foundational as ROI isn't enough to tell you whether or not you're actually making a difference.
Mm.
And going back to analogies, I'll give you another analogy. If you're the head of marketing for a restaurant, what is the highest ROI campaign you're capable of running?
Um,
The highest ROI campaign you can possibly run is to have the hostess hand out 50% off coupons to everyone who walks in the restaurant that already has a reservation. You're going to have near zero cost, so very low CPL. You're going to have effectively 100% conversion rate. You're going to have thousands of dollars of marketing influenced, marketing attributed revenue, and
and you're
it's
about
going
to
to be a
lose a
total
bunch of
waste.
money.
And you're about to lose a bunch of money. But the point there is that even though this is sort of a pathological example,
Right.
why do you think what makes you think your campaign with a higher ROI number isn't really doing the same thing this campaign is?
Mm.
Um, because you cannot just look at the ROI number and have a clue whether or not you're just pouring money down a rat hole, albeit very efficiently. And
They made it so easy for us, Dale.
I know. So this goes back to this idea of efficiency versus effectiveness. And effectiveness is, what is the business purpose of marketing? Marketing exists for one reason only: to convince people to buy more of our stuff than they buy of the other guy's stuff. And so the question is that, are you doing something that will take, and so you got, let's say you spend a lot of money on a marketing campaign.
Mhm.
You got three things that can happen. One is you, let's say you talk to only people who are never going to buy. And so, you're selling Lamborghinis to 15-year-olds. Uh, uh, they're
Perfect.
highly interested. They really want your swag, but they're not buying a Lamborghini.
Right.
So there you've got, obviously, a low ROI campaign because you're just not getting any sales. But if your campaign involves handing out coupons to, 65-year-old bald overweight guys who are in the Lamborghini dealership looking at Lamborghinis, um, then you've also that will look like it has a high ROI,
Hmm.
but it is no more effective than marketing Lamborghinis to 15-year-olds.
Yes.
Because the fundamental question is, did I alter the future state of the world by having executed this campaign or having executed this piece of marketing? And if we ended up with the same future state of the world, whether that future state was they didn't buy or they did buy, um, it means that we have zero effectiveness. We've done nothing to alter the future state of the world. What we want to do is to find that person that might have bought a Lotus or a Ferrari, but instead we got to them and we're able to influence them to consider to buy that Lamborghini that they never would have thought about before.
Mm.
And now you've brought into existence a future state of the world that would not have otherwise existed. That is marketing effectiveness.
God, that's
And
amazing. Well, I mean, so like I'm going to get to KPIs, but I mean, like, how do you set a KPI for that? Be like, let us know in 15 years if this 15-year-old buys a Lamborghini. You know what I
so,
mean? Like timeline
but
again. It might take a while for these
so
things to come, these eggs to hatch. Yes, Dale.
so um I'll tell you a quick story, and this is the problem with a lot of marketing is
Yeah.
that you have very, very long lag and latency periods, meaning
Yes.
it can be a very long time before someone actually buys,
Mm.
but they can remember you also potentially for a very long period of time.
Right.
Yeah, and so there's this idea of the 95-5 rule, which is basically it's a lot of numbers, but at
Mm.
the end of the day, what the 95-5 rule says is simply not everyone is always in market all the time.
Mm.
Some people are actively in market, and then some people are not in market. And when we say not in market, we don't mean they're thinking about it, that you're top of mind. It is like you don't exist.
Right.
um,
Let's be a little bit more harsh with that
and
truth.
uh, uh, and again, the analogy I give there is that you know if I just got married and had a giant expensive wedding and expensive honeymoon, I am not in the market for a Bumble account. Now, I might be in the future, if this marriage doesn't hold together. But right now, I am not. It's not like I'm thinking about it or you're top of mind for me. It is
Right.
like you don't exist.
Right.
But again, this goes back to this core idea of marketing exists to bring into existence a future state of the world different than what would have existed if we had not done the marketing. And that future state could either be, you know, they didn't buy, but they never were gonna buy, or they did buy, but they were gonna buy anyway, or the third option is they weren't gonna buy, but now they're buying. And so those are the 3, future pathways that could exist. And our job is to be as effective as possible at pouring resources into that middle pathway of they would not have bought except for the fact that we were there with the marketing.
Man, and
And
it comes down to being literate about things. It comes down to taking a look at those famous acronyms that are being shoved on our face and asking questions. Is this an efficiency? Is this effectiveness? How can we gauge the future state, our impact on it? And I think that's where I'm trying to get into this algorithm, model
well,
data.
yeah, I mean, here's one of the and for instance, this is one of the big problems with a lot of the AI analytics stuff that's out
Mm,
here right now.
hmm.
That it perpetuates a fundamental flaw, which is you cannot work backwards from success
Hmm.
to know whether or not what you did worked. And here's an example. Um, there was uh, an unnamed company that put a report out a couple of months ago about reading blogs,
Hmm.
and they said, according to our data, something like, you know, 70%, 80% of closed one deals read 5 blog
Oh
articles.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I saw
Therefore,
that. Right.
reading blog articles is really important. And
Correlation,
and
causation, Dale.
right. And so one question is, the people that didn't buy, maybe they didn't read the blog article because they were never ever going to buy. But but the more fundamental question there is that statement alone. 80% of closed one deals read five blogs,
Right.
five blog articles.
Sure.
Does that mean that blog articles are useful? The answer is I have no fucking clue. Because what if I throw out another number that says 95% of closed loss deals read seven or more blog articles?
Right.
Now that tells me that reading your blog is driving people away from buying, and your best move would be to shut it down and delete everything immediately, not keep doing more. But at the same time, if it turns out that closed loss, that you know 80% of people that ended up as closed loss read one blog article, you might be closer to something that represents causality.
So and so
But
so I mean, like how can marketers, like when we're dealing with algorithm driven platforms, like how can we ensure like we're working with trustworthy data? I mean, like when you're talking about
it's not the data;
literacy.
it's about the thinking. It's not about it's not about the tool set; it's about the mindset.
Quote bomb.
And the question here is, if we go back to the original concept, which is the purpose of marketing is to bring into existence a different state of the world than what would have existed otherwise, then what that means is you can only know your whether or not you're being effective if you're if the analytics and the data is giving you a differential value, a comparative number. In this case,
Right.
what's the difference between those who bought from us versus bought from someone else in terms of how many blog articles they read? Because again, what we're looking at is we're trying to measure the level of difference we made, in the future state of the world through our data. And this is where attribution data falls down, because attribution data what's called a single-sided measurement as opposed to a two-sided measurement. And let me give you one last example of why you cannot work backwards from success. There's a statistic: 100% of people who contract dengue fever get a fever. It's literally right there in the name of the disease. So the question is, if you wake up in the morning with a fever, does that mean you must have dengue?
Hmm.
No. So you cannot work backwards from the end state. I woke up with a fever to, a starting state. I must have dengue. In fact, in the United States, if you wake up with a fever in the morning, you will be about 350,000 times more likely for it to be not dengue fever than for it to turn out that you've got dengue fever. And so the analogy to that is, if someone who becomes a closed one account did this stuff, therefore doing this stuff must mean that they're gonna, if we can get them to do more of this stuff, then it must mean that they're gonna become closed one. And the answer is no.
Well, and so one of the things that I was realizing is that the winners write the rule books and the losers just lose. And there is a massive mountain of failure for all marketing practices. And then at the top is this thing where it worked. And then I'm gonna write a book about it. And then I'm gonna
Right.
tell everybody about it. And you're like, oh my God, that's great. So that
And
applies to me. And you're like, I'm so sorry.
yeah.
No. But you did buy the book.
Let me tell you about my bow tie framework.
Right.
But let me throw one last thing out. There is another type of number that marketers seem to be incapable of distinguishing from reality. And so if we go back to talking about performance metrics, so performance metric is some number that represents something that happened in the real world or
Right.
the state of something in the real world.
Right.
But performance metrics are inherently about things that have actually occurred in the real world. Um, but there are numbers that masquerade as performance metrics that are in fact just guesses.
Mm.
I mean, literally, you're just pulling, may as well be random numbers out of thin air. But because it's a number and you're assigning it and you're giving it a name, people feel like it's a real number.
Mm.
Here's a good example. Um, Lead scoring.
Mm.
So, how do you come up with a lead scoring system? You have a bunch of people, marketers, because there's never a salesperson in the room, who are sitting around in a room with no customers around, and in fact, with no one around who's ever actually had a real life conversation with a customer, or has ever even seen a real life customer, in the flesh.
Right.
It's nothing but personas in their head, but
Right.
they're sitting around the room and they're deciding that downloading a crappy ebook is worth 5 points, and visiting the about page is worth 1 point, and visiting the pricing page is worth 10 points. Where do those numbers come from? They pull them out of someplace.
Right.
And
Well, it's from
it,
what your conception of what the most valuable things are. So
yeah, but based on a bunch of people who've never actually seen a real live customer,
no customers.
never had
Yeah,
a
right.
conversation. You're
True. True.
guessing. These
You
are
are.
guesses. But the moment you turn them into numbers and you give them a name, it's a lead scoring table, with real numbers, then people pretend as though this is reality, and it's not reality. It's a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of guesses.
Mm-hmm.
Here's
Well,
another example of a bunch of guesses.
yeah.
Every single multi-touch attribution model that exists, U shape, W shape, inverse shape, first touch, last touch. You're basically just assigning numbers to say that certain touches are worth more or less than other touches based on nothing other than just pulling it out of your whatever.
But your marketing plan. Well, so here, just give me like one piece of advice for somebody out there. They're a marketer. They've just heard all these things. They're surrounded by all these things. What is your one piece of advice to help them get a hold on their data literacy and kind of have some action and some inspiration in their
I mean,
roles?
easy. Where did this number come from? Is this number a guess, or is it something you measured? Is this number something that happened in the past, or something that you hope will happen in the future? These are very basic questions. You don't need, you can have complete total data literacy, with nothing more than roughly a fifth grade level of math literacy. You don't need math to do this. You just need to think logically when there are claims that come attached with numbers. Where did that number come from? Is there any, what's the evidence that this is real? What's the implications of this number? So one of the things that's been floating around for 35 years is this idea of this claim that a 5% increase in retention will double
Oh,
your profits.
I know.
And and the point is my response is do the math. Show me the math. Show me how the math works on this.
Right.
Because once you start trying to put numbers to this, you realize this is just all bullshit.
Well, but I love it. Just applying a mindset. Don't get confused with the tools. Don't get confused
Yeah.
with,
Just think.
numbers.
Just think through,
Just think.
where did it come from? What does it mean? What does it imply?
Oh my gosh. Well,
If this number is real, then it must mean that these other things have to also be real.
right.
So think about the implications of the statement or the number that's
Oh,
being thrown out. And then just, does this make any sense?
right. Man, are we asking that question enough? I don't know. But man, this was a wonderful interview. How can people connect with you and learn more online, Dale?
Best place is LinkedIn. I'm Dale W. Harrison, so I'm always around, and that's the best place to catch me. And I'm open to connect with anyone.
Cheese or chocolate?
Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay, cheese or chocolate?
Oh, cheese,
Okay. Lava lamp or black light?
lava,
Fast lane or this is fine lane?
fast lane,
M&M or sixlets?
or what?
Sixlets. Do you know what sixlets are? I took a chance here. It's a chocolate candy.
Oh, probably anything that's not an M&M.
Oh, brand dispreference. Uh-oh.
Right.
Market. Causation, correlation. Name on the desk or name on the door?
I've had both. It no longer matters.
Yeah. Flexing on us, Dale, but then also bringing it down. Finally, be interested to get this answer. Shop in a mall or shop from a magazine?
Shop online. But probably a magazine.
we will accept that answer.
What Gets Measured is a NinjaCat podcast. Please rate and review the show wherever you find your podcasts. Share this episode on social and visit us on the web at ninjacat.io.